Today, we're recreating the Avengers Infinity War intro in HITFILM Pro. Welcome to Backyard Filmmaking. I'm your host Chris, and today we're recreating the Avengers Infinity War intro. Although they didn't use the intro that we're recreating today in the actual film, this is the intro that is used in a lot of the promotional content, such as the trailers. I went and saw the film the day it opened, Friday, April 27th, and I was wowed. It was insane, from the visual effects to the acting to the plot itself and the outcome of everything. I walked out of the theater in shock. It was really impressive, and the wait for Avengers 4 is going to be a long one. Without further ado, let's get started. Arguably one of the most important parts of an intro is selecting the right fonts. For this, I had to download two. One for the main Avengers portion of the text, and another for the Infinity War portion. For Avengers, I chose the Avengers Heroic Avenger font by Fontry. I accessed and downloaded this font from dafont.com. For Infinity War, I went to a different site, fontpalace.com, in order to download the Bank Gothic font. Both of these fonts will be in the description for download. With the fonts downloaded, we can get started with the breakdown of this effect. As you can see, there are three main composite shots, all of which culminate in the final effect. The first component was creating the backdrop. For this, I took a PNG image of the giant Avengers A and enlarged it just a bit. With this, I threw on two effects, one for coloring and the other for detailing. The first was for the coloring. It was a tint effect. I mapped the black to a nice golden color. To make it seem that this was metallic, I used the chrominator effect. I adjusted the settings. The updated settings for the effect were a 24 pixel detail scale, and 3.1 reflection distance. The background is now composed in its own composite shot. I chose to create multiple composite shots to keep myself more organized. The next composite shot included the main bulk of the effect. I'd already thrown in the composite shot with the giant A. In order to view the deconstruction of the rest of the effect, I'll be hiding all of the other aspects and slowly revealing them. First off, I keyframed the opacity for the giant A composite shot, so it faded in. Next, I'll touch on the lens flares for the giant A. I created two new black planes and dropped a light flares effect on each of them. These flares, just like the rest of the flares in this effect, were blended using the Add Blend mode. However, you could choose whatever blend mode you want. For both of these flares, I selected the Digital Blocks type and colored them a nice gold. I then, for the first one, keyframed its position so it moved across the bottom area of the A. I also keyframed its intensity so it spiked a bit during its journey, then faded towards the end. For the second flare, I rotated it and then repeated the process of keyframing it along the A, and then keyframing the intensity. With both of these lens flares developed, we can begin to break down the Avengers text itself. Although the text is 3D and thus has a light to accompany it, I'm not going to be showing the light quite yet. Without the light, the text looks like this, a brownish color. However, with the light on, the amount of detail is revealed. The two main effects that added the detail were the bevel and extrude geometry effects. For the bevel effect, the settings were a depth of 15 and an expansion of -15. For the extrude effect, I set it so the extrusion only faced the back and had a depth of 278. I also put on a parallax effect. Why? Because it gives more detail to the text. I imported a scratch texture and dropped it into my project. This is what the texture looks like. Of course, I needed to hide this for the rest of the effect so it wouldn't be just randomly floating there during the intro. I then changed the height map for the parallax effect to the texture. I toned it down by giving it a depth of 5 and a blur height of 27. I also added the chrominator effect. The settings were a detail scale of 2.3 and a reflection distance of 1. With the text complete, let's dive into discussing the lens flare for this. Just like for the first few lens flares, this was created by creating a new black plane and then dropping on the light flares effect. I chose the same type and color for the flare. Similarly, I keyframed its intensity so that it spiked up and then faded back out. The next element is the Infinity War text. This was a more simple text layer than the Avengers. It was a 3D text layer, just like the Avengers text, but instead had the Bank Gothic font with a golden color, and only the bevel effect on it, with the settings being a depth of 15 and an expansion of -15. The text, somewhat like the Avengers text, faded in with keyframed opacity just after the Avengers text appeared. One of the final pieces of this effect are the borders above and below the Infinity War text. These were easy to create. All I had to do was create a new plane colored gold, then use the rectangular mask tool to make a shape I liked. I moved this first border above, then duplicated it and moved the duplicant below the Infinity War text layer. I keyframed the opacity for both so they faded in at the same time that Infinity War did. The last piece of this effect is the lens flare on the bottom border. Just like all the other lens flares in this effect, I dropped on a light flares effect onto a black plane. I then selected the same flare type and color as all of the other flares. I keyframed its intensity so it flared up just as the border and text faded in. And that's the effect broken down. It's really not as wild or complex as I had anticipated it had to be. After adding some music, the effect is complete. And that's how you create the effect. I personally think this is a pretty faithful recreation of the intro. Yes, it's not perfect, but I think it looks pretty good. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Backyard Filmmaking. If you enjoyed, don't be afraid to hit that like button or even subscribe. If you have any suggestions for future videos, tell us in the comments below, and thanks for watching.